Madam Deputy Speaker, HS2 has been proposed as a way of solving the issues we currently face. We're told that HS2 is green, that it will deliver regional growth and that it will resolve slow speeds between British cities. However, all of these claims are questionable. It is important that we highlight them before UK taxpayers are asked to foot the enormous £32.7 billion bill. HS2 will see an increase in CO2 emissions. Supporters of HS2 insist that the project is carbon neutral. However, according to HS2 Action Alliance, 250-mile-an-hour trains use 3 times the power that 125-mile-an-hour trains do. HS2 Limited's plans rely on transferring passengers from existing classic rail, which uses much less fuel and carbon, to high-speed trains. This means, if any, environmental benefits after creating this new line. We have also failed to learn lessons from HS1. In Kent, Thanet remains one of the most deprived areas in England, despite it being served by high-speed rail direct to London. Even the experts are questioning these proposals. As Professor Mackey from the University of Leeds has said, for various reasons, HS2 is rather unlikely to make much difference to the north-south divide. A spatial analysis would probably show London to be the main benefiting regions, and so it is unlikely that HS2 is going to deliver the regional benefits that have been promised. Now, London operates as a brilliant hub, and cities across the country have brilliant connections with the capital. This should not be the focus of investment. Lines based outside London need investment too. People don't go out of London for work and back to sleep. People overwhelmingly come into work. Our European neighbours have had similar experience. Just one example. In France, on the Paris-Rhône-Alps line, passengers grow to Paris was 3 times greater than that from Paris. The only people who will benefit from this project will be those living within about 10 miles radius of the station near Birmingham on the SH2 line. People living any further away, such as Black Country or Coventry, will be asked to travel more than 10 miles. Will Britain really be prepared to pay for the cost of travelling to stations that are more than 10 miles away? And even if it were a subsidised travel, why should 99% of people have to pay for the 1% that use it? In fact, I will.
It does seem rather perverse, does it not, when we're expecting commuters daily, such as those on my line down to London, to have to reduce the amount of public subsidy, that we are now putting a massive public subsidy into another line. It's very, very much cherry picking.
And I must agree with you. In fact, only a very small percentage of people use trains on a regular basis. As my honourable friend, the Transport Secretary, has said, 10 million people travel annually on HS1. That is about 30,000 people a day on HS1 and another, say, 1.5 million people on all the other trains. What is the number of those not travelling? Practically everyone else in the country, say 59 million. That's the difference. 1.5 million on one hand, 59 million on your other. Mr. Speaker, another argument in favour of HS2 is that current trains are too full and the project will provide the opportunity to increase capacity. I disagree. If trains are currently too full, why not put the prices up? The way to make this fair is to say, yes, as a regular commuter, you can keep the current rate, but as a new user of the trains, you should be required to pay a bit more. Right. Now, this will encourage further growth and investment in towns and cities outside London and will also raise more money towards the cost of running trains. Mr. Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, this project, if it is to be delivered, must be delivered using private funds. The public sector should not be expected to foot the bill for HS2 at a time when they have to make their own financial sacrifices, and there will no need at all to spend public money once we're out of the austerity.
Deputy Speaker, earlier this year, hundreds of my constituents woke to find that the value of their homes had been substantially reduced and those who had plans to move discovered that purchasers were no longer able to get mortgages, and that remains the case. Yeah. The reason was the announcement of the preferred route for HS2, a route which followed none of the options which had previously been published, nor did it follow an existing transport corridor. And further, it was a project which would not see a shovel in the ground for 13 years and would only be completed in 20 years, uncertainty and disruption for a generation. And it was also a route which I've been told can hardly be altered because it's designed to take ultra-high-speed trains travelling at up to 250 miles an hour and hence must be straight. As a result, it goes through 5 villages in my constituency and comes very close to others. I have long advocated sensible investment in rail in the UK. When the previous government proposed to build new track for the West Coast Main Line across the Stafford constituency to cut journey times and improve, I supported it. But I believe that this is the wrong solution. Madam Deputy Speaker, the government has rightly said that a new rail network needs to be designed to increase capacity rather than speed. So that's why I cannot understand the fixation with speeds of 225 to 250 miles an hour if that means that routes are so inflexible they cannot follow existing corridors such as motorways, as many have argued. There is no railway in Europe which travels at that speed. The maximum is 200 miles an hour. Then there is the question of capacity and demand. I imagine that a great deal of detailed work had been done on this by HS2, so I wrote and asked for current figures for utilisation of West Coast mainline services and those projected to 2035. The answer was from HS2, I'm sorry, but we do not have information on the current figures of West Coast mainline services. The Department of Transport may do. I had also imagined, of course, yeah.
I'm grateful to my old friend for giving way. Would he agree that the fact that Virgin is starting a major advertising campaign to attract people to travel on the West Coast Main Line means that they've hardly got a capacity problem?
Well, I do, and the fact that they have the first-class coaches are almost never full. Indeed, I've seen one person per carriage many times in first class. They need to make them standard class, or at least 2 of them. I'd also imagine that HS2 would largely be used by business travellers, so I was very surprised to have the reply from HS2 stating that 70% of journeys on HS2 are expected to be for leisure purposes. Now, I fully recognise the value of leisure travel to the economy, but where is the justification for an ultra-high-speed line, such as that which they seem so determined to build, if 70% of those using it are doing so for leisure? That brings me on to the question of the business case for HS2. Yeah.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. And will he also recall that the initial estimates of the capacity usage for HS1 were overestimated by 30%?
Yes, and I do fully understand the problems that have already been referred to by my honourable friend from Northampton, by my honourable friends from the Yorkshire area, and we need to do something about that, but an ultra-high-speed line is not the answer. So I come on to the business case for HS2. There's been a lot of argument about whether or not it's valid. I'm no expert in these matters, but I have to say there are several things that make me sceptical. The first is the apparent lack of knowledge by HS2 of current demand. The second is the surprising fact that it appears to be largely a leisure railway rather than a business railway. Since leisure passengers are much more sensitive to price than business passengers, especially premium business, I wonder whether this price sensitivity has been fully incorporated into the business case. And the third is the large question mark of whether this is the right way to help the Midlands and North to develop. Just this week, plans were unveiled for a vast new commercial development at Old Oak Common in London at the proposed junction of Crossrail and HS2, which I very much welcome. But it underlined the concerns of those who worry that HS2 will simply bring more development into London, possibly at the expense of the Midlands, North and Scotland. And then there is the business case for the West Coast Main Line after HS2 comes into service. The West Coast Main Line would remain an essential part of our national transport infrastructure, and so it's essential that the business case for post-2035 is at least as strong as that for HS2, and I haven't had that from HS2 despite my asking for it. Given that HS2 is so dependent on leisure traffic, I'm very concerned at what will be left for the West Coast Main Line. Clearly an increase in freight, some leisure and commuter and regional services. But will this be sufficient to maintain the West Coast Main Line without very substantial subsidy? And if a subsidy will indeed be required, has that been factored into the business case for HS2? Two final points, Madam Deputy Speaker. I fully support the comments by North Staffordshire MPs earlier that there's a real concern over the connectivity of Stoke-on-Trent, which is in our top 10 conurbations in the country, so I ask the Secretary of State to take that very seriously. And secondly, compensation. I entirely agree with those who support the property bond idea. This must be done. In France, they pay well over the market rate for property. Things go through much faster. Let's be generous in this, as so many have argued. Madam Deputy Speaker, I have no pleasure whatsoever in opposing the proposals before us. If it was a bill to provide for additional capacity in the network without a fixation on ultra-high-speed trains, which made full use of existing corridors at a sustainable cost, I would be supporting it wholeheartedly. But I'm afraid it does none of these things.
Mr. William Cash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I oppose this bill on national and on local grounds. I pay tribute to the people of Stone, Swinnerton, Whitmore and Madeley for the meetings that we've had to discuss these matters, and I want to pay tribute to the CLA and also to Stop HS2 for the backup they've given at these meetings and in the consideration of all these matters. I oppose it for very many reasons. It cuts a swathe right the way through my constituency from top to bottom, and I also agree very much with what my right honourable friend, the member for Cheshire and Amersham, has said, and also my honourable friend, my neighbour and good friend, the member for Stafford. I don't need to repeat their points. They've made them forcibly and served many others, and they are right. The reality is that my constituents gain no benefit from this whatsoever. As somebody quite rightly said, it's all pain and no gain. And the unfairness of the current arrangements, this complete failure to understand that in the 21st century we must have a proper compensation arrangement if this bill is to go through, as many predict. The unfairness is so gross that it really has to be rectified. I don't believe that the comments of the Public Accounts Committee can be in any way disputed. And as for the amount of money involved, this is the biggest white elephant of all time. It's gone up already, as some have already noted, to 50 billion plus, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's 75 billion by the time it's finished. The reality is that this is a very, very expensive operation which is blighting people's homes already in a way that is completely unfair, and I think that it really deserves to be discarded. But in terms of the compensation, the arrangements that are being made favour the acquirer so much against the claimant, and they don't even say how the compensation is to be calculated. And in terms of the arrangements for the exceptional hardship scheme, 3/4 of the applications have been rejected, as the Minister knows, and indeed the only compensation is available through a discretionary scheme. I certainly give way to the Honourable.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. Would he agree that there is nothing in this bill that either pushes forward any compensation scheme or stops the government continuing to pay compensation? And actually what we really want is that new consultation on compensation, which I hope will be launched as soon as tomorrow or the next day by the department.
Very, very well said, and I couldn't agree with my right honourable friend more. The fact is that the current arrangements for compensation are wholly inadequate to deal with this unique, even if I believe it to be a completely appalling scheme. But having said that, what we also are now pressing for is a property bond scheme which needs to be set up, which would underwrite the property values where the scheme has an adverse impact. I'm sure that honourable members will know that the greatest impact on the property market is fear of the unknown, and a property bond scheme would create stability in the market. It has already been used by BAA, and or at least the idea has already been propagated by the BAA and Central Railways. The ideas are out there, and when it comes to the committee stage, I have no doubt that amendments will be put down to show how it could work in practice, and it can be argued through in more detail on that occasion. I'd simply say that this is a scheme which has absolutely no support whatsoever in my constituency that I've been aware of. I've had all these meetings, and I've said at the end of those meetings, does anybody in this room, packed rooms, overflowing halls, does anybody agree with the proposals for this scheme? And only one person, who I think was from HS2 himself, actually said yes.
They were lynched.
It's absolutely amazing the amount of very sensible opposition that's been put up to this. And as for West Coast, actually it's a very, very good service. And my right honourable friend, the member for Stafford, really hit the nail on the head. The fact is that it's there and it's available and it can be improved. There can be extensions to Euston to make it more available, to improve the system. But basically, the bottom line on this is that this whole scheme should be rejected. I shall be voting against it with the absolute determination tonight, and if we lose, we move on to the compensation arrangements, and on that we must have a property bond and proper arrangements in fairness to these people who've been completely blighted and their lives have been destroyed. I think it's disgraceful.
Yeah.